Alright, I hope this video is not too long. I did research, lots and lots of research on Deadman Wonderland. I don't have the anime currently, but as you can see, I have the manga. I took lots and lots of notes. The anime I have seen. I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it was quite a few years back, not long after it originally aired. And then obviously recently when I was compiling the notes. So like I said, I hope it's not too long. So the anime has 13 episodes. One of those episodes is an OVA. I'm not going to really talk about that. I'm going to talk about the 12 other episodes, which are more pertinent to this discussion. The anime ran from April to October of 2011 in Japan, but it didn't air until around 2012 in North America. It was licensed by Funimation. It's now up on Crunchyroll. I ended up watching it on Netflix. It's no longer on Netflix, so I watched it on Crunchyroll recently. And Crunchyroll and Funimation kind of have a good relationship. They share each other's catalogs. It only covers the first 5 volumes of the manga. That's these ones right here. There are 13 volumes of the manga. So you're missing out on quite a bit. The manga, as I said, has 13 volumes. It ran from May 2007 to August 2013 in Japan. It did not start hitting publication in North America until 2014 to 2016. So if you're like me and you were watching the anime years back, you had no way of reading the manga unless you were looking at scanlations online, which that's illegal. I don't really condone that. I waited. So the plot of Deadman Wonderland, if you've not seen it, I will tell you what it is, and if it sounds at all interesting to you, I would recommend looking into it, and then afterwards maybe come back here and we can talk about it a bit more. So Deadman Wonderland is about this younger boy. He's about 14 years old. His name is Ganta Igarashi, and he witnesses the brutal mass murder of his entire class by this really weird red man who's just floating outside of his classroom window. And keep in mind, his classroom window is quite a few floors up. The dude's just floating there. And yeah, so everybody in his class is completely eviscerated, brutally murdered in front of him, and because he's the sole survivor, he's blamed for it. As the red man leaves him alive, he also implants something in his chest. That's important later on. So Ganta is sentenced to serve his sentence at Deadman Wonderland, which is a privatized prison. It has been around since the Tokyo earthquake, which happened 10 years earlier. Now, this prison is not like a regular prison. There are a lot of weird people in there, and it runs in a not so typical fashion. All of the inmates have these collars on them, which punish them frequently if they misbehave. And if you do not receive your candy, which is an antidote to the poison in your collar, every 3 days, you will die. It's not a great place, especially for a 14-year-old kid. And there are frequent races between the inmates for rewards that would keep them alive. These are held for the entertainment of others. They don't realize that what's happening is real. So the audience will be watching these death races, essentially, watching people get torn apart by all these different obstacles, and they think it's all a show. It's not. And there are other such battle royales between the inmates that take place inside the prison that others aren't privy to see. And they are brutal, very bloody. Now, there's a certain segment of the inmate population that has these weird powers, and Ganta learns that he has these powers that the red man gave him by implanting this thing inside of his chest. It gives him the ability to control his own blood and use it as a weapon. And so these people are called Deadmen. That's kind of why it's called Deadman Wonderland. All of these people are on the lowest level of the prison, kind of underground. They try to keep them a secret because it has a lot to do with that earthquake. Without getting into too much detail about it, there is another prisoner there who nobody really knows anything about, but she does know Ganta. Her name is Shiro. She's very odd. She's kind of an albino girl. She's like she's got white hair, red eyes, very pale skin, and yeah, so she knows Ganta, and Ganta kind of vaguely remembers her, but he can't really remember why he knows her, and there's just something really different about her that I can't tell you what it is. But if any of this sounds vaguely interesting to you, I would recommend at least watching the anime. If you like the anime, you will like the manga, because there's a lot more of the manga. So if you're familiar with either one of these, the anime or the manga, perhaps you're familiar with both. Let's take a look at some of the differences between the two, because like I said, keep in mind I had only seen the anime originally, and then quite a bit later, like a few years later, I got to read all of the story. And so it wasn't until I watched the anime again after having read all of the issues of the manga that I realized there's something a little bit off here. And let's kind of get into those differences. So quite a few of the differences have to do with the fact that they place scenes out of order, and that doesn't really change the plot necessarily, it just changes the flow of things. So they'll either place a scene from the manga before it's meant to happen or later than it's meant to happen. And considering that the manga is broken up differently than the episodes of the anime are, I can understand why they would do that, though it's not always necessary. So you would have, for example, in the first episode, it covers about 1.5 chapters from the manga. So that's broken up differently than what the manga is. You know, you have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and you can quit whenever you want. So they include a certain amount of material in each episode, and it's not just like we're gonna stick to 1 chapter per episode. No, it's broken up kind of in the middle of a scene. Some other smaller differences have to do with the numbers game. What I mean by that is like certain numbers used to represent a group of people that have been killed, or certain statistics, certain numbers. Later on with a character named Rakuro, for example, he has his calculations. He calculates what he thinks going to go down, what he thinks is going to happen, your chances of survival, etc. And I'm not sure if it's a translation issue between the anime and the manga. I watched the anime with subtitles. It could be that. It could be a misprint some of the time. So a few examples of this. Very early on in the show, the number of people killed in Ganta's class is very slightly different to what it is in the manga. So in the anime, they say that 29 of 30 people in his class were killed. In the manga, it's 21 of 22. That's a very minor thing. Like I said, these are the minor differences. We're going to get into the bigger ones. A larger number discrepancy occurs later on, like I said, with that character, Rokuro. He calculates the odds that somebody will make it out alive. In the anime, this is 29, or in the anime, this is 2%. In the manga, it's 20. Now, that's an issue that could possibly just be a typo, leaving off that 0. And again, later on, he mentions that somebody has a 32% chance of making it out in the show. In the manga, it's 72. That's a pretty big leap there. So again, small thing, but I mean, a 32% chance is quite a bit lower than 72. That's just something I noticed. So let's get on to the bigger differences between the two mediums. I'm going to start in order of episode 1 and just kind of move onwards chronologically. So in episode 1, which kind of goes over chapters 1.5, you know, so it's like chapter 1 and then half of chapter 2. There's a forged videotape that's given as evidence at Ganta's trial. Like, that never happens in the manga. The trial is very short. He's given his sentence and it just moves right on to him at the prison. The reason why this is interesting is because it's mentioned several times throughout the anime series, kind of as a way to impress his guilt upon others, including the father of one of his classmates, who is present at the trial and tries to attack Ganta. And later on in the series, Ganta is writing up his will and includes the father in there as a kind of a bit of remorse. Again, that doesn't happen. None of this happens. Later on in the first episode, we meet the character of Shiro. During her first conversation with Ganta, she doesn't mention having met him years earlier. That struck me as quite odd. She makes it very clear in the manga that she had met Ganta and that they had made a promise to each other many, many years ago when they were both children. They had promised to always remain friends. So I think it's important to include something like that in the show because they need to make it clear early on that they had had this connection and that even if Ganta doesn't remember it, she does. So in episode 2, which covers chapters 2 and 3, early on in the episode, this is huge. We should be meeting a character named Azami. She has a vital role in the manga. We never get to meet her in the show. So she's supposed to meet Ganta in the cafeteria. There's a scene there where he's trying to get some food. He realizes he doesn't have the money to do so, and she offers him one of her sandwiches, which kind of shows you what kind of person she is. And then this big bully on the block, Kozuchi, he comes in and he kind of acts all tough and basically threatens Ganta and threatens an old man and says if Ganta doesn't, appreciate what he's doing, he'll hurt him too, and that he should just laugh at it. And he does. He goes along with it because he doesn't want to cross paths with Kozuchi. And Azami doesn't appreciate that. She doesn't appreciate how Ganta's just giving in to the threat of Kozuchi, and she takes the sandwich back and gives it to the old man after he's been beaten, which again expresses that amount of integrity that she has very early on. And you get to sympathize with her more than you sympathize with Ganta. And none of that happens. Absolutely none of that happens. And what they kind of did instead was replace some of the scenes with her with a character named Yo. Later on in that episode, Azami is supposed to enter the race with Ganta. Instead, Yo does. And again, Kozuchi comes in and starts threatening people. He's supposed to step on Azami's arm and break it, rendering her unable to enter the race. It happens to Yo instead. So it makes it quite clear out of the gate that they were never going to introduce her, which is a shame because, as I said, she's a very vital character in the manga. You can't really do anything without her. Also notable towards the end of episode 2, this is right at the end of the race after a whole bunch of people have been killed. Kozuchi falls to his death on the show. In the manga, that does not happen. He manages to throw a knife towards Ganta, and Shiro steps in front of it, and she takes a knife in the back for him. And afterwards, after the race is over, Kozuchi is taken back by some guards and given the option of getting a knife in the heart or spending a year in solitary confinement as punishment. Yeah, that's quite the offer. Nothing really notable happens in episode 3, which covers chapters 3, 4, and 5. Episode 4 covers chapters 6 and 7. Episode 5 is chapters 7 and 8. At the very beginning of episode 5, we hear somebody humming. Now, earlier in the anime, we heard Shiro singing some sort of tune about a woodpecker. There were lyrics attached to this. She's talking about a woodpecker and singing that. Now, this scene does not contain lyrics. It's just a tune. Being that you've only heard this song once, it's unlikely that you would immediately make that connection. They make that connection in the manga by having the same lyrics there so that you go, oh yeah, this person's singing that song as well. And it is important to have that connection made. Later on in the episode, Azami's lack of presence is once again made. Shiro wants to look for Ganta, who is on G Block. He's been segregated from the others because of the fact that he's a dead man. Dead man walking. No, not like that. I mean, dead man, his abilities. So she asks Yo to come with her and help her look for Ganta. And the way that this is done in the manga is that they run into Azami, and Azami tips them off about a vent that will get them there. She's not there, of course, in the anime, so they just kind of skip over all of that. Yeah, they skip back to Ganta, who's alone in his cell, and at this time they should be introducing even more characters who, again, would be even more important later on in the manga. Do they do this? No, they do not. I'm talking about Choplan, Masu, Munetsuki, and Hitaru Jiji. Hitaru Jiji is a very interesting character. I can't tell you about him, really, because I'd be spoiling a lot from the manga in the future. Masu and Munetsuki are present in the anime. Munetsuki is introduced in the next episode. It's just a little bit later than what she should have been introduced. And Masu is there kind of aggressively, not attacking her, but he's hungry all the time. He wants to eat her flowers, even though flowers aren't edible, really. He's trying to eat her flowers. And that is something that he does in the manga, but we don't see him again after that for whatever reason. I'm just puzzled by the fact that they are leaving out so many important characters. At this point in time, I was kind of like, what is going on? At the very end of this episode, Shiro is seen smiling and making the exact same sound that the red man made after killing Ganta's classmates, that kishi. She's kind of just like, kishi. We don't get that in the manga, really. She smiles, just kind of like that. There's no sound effect there. There was no sound effect when the red man did the killing either. So therefore, the connection between the two is a little bit more ambiguous than it is on the show. If you're watching the show and you see that, you're basically just like, yep, she killed them. She killed all of them. So, on to episode 9. On the opposite end of the spectrum of characters not being introduced, in this episode, one is introduced far too early, and I'm talking about a character named Mockingbird. He's very, very strange, but you don't really know that right away here. He's introduced in a scene where it's not pertinent for him to be there at all, and I really don't know why they introduced him because they don't do anything with him here. So there's a group of dead men living in the basement called Scar Chain. They're working on an escape plan to get out, and not only that, but to release information about what's really going on in the prison. And there's a character named Nagi. He's the leader of the group. During the escape plan, something really bad happens, and he's trying to get a message back to headquarters. So Shiro is supposed to be there to receive that message, and she's supposed to be alone. But in the anime, they decide, hey, let's have this other character be there to receive the message, and then, let him relay that to Shiro instead. That's all they do with him there. Just have him stand there looking at a computer. And chronologically speaking, he's supposed to be introduced at the end of episode 10. They have that same scene from the manga in there. So that is his introduction scene, but Shiro and Mockingbird already know each other by that point. So Shiro recognizes him instead of being like, hey, who are you? And Mockingbird introducing himself. So that's one key difference there. And also, very notably, Mockingbird says something to the effect of that he will not do anything to hurt her. Emphasis on the word her, saying that he will not hurt Shiro, but that everybody else around them is fair game. And that basically sets Mockingbird up to be a sort of villain right away. And that's never done in the manga. We don't quite know enough about him at that point. So that's a mistake on their part. They're really spoiling his character. So also in episode 10, Shiro has a flashback to when she's eating snacks with her grandpa. His name is Hagure. He's that torn up old man we've seen throughout the series, both in the anime and the manga. And they discuss the fact that, in the manga, they discuss the fact that Ganta, they wonder when Ganta will be coming home, indicating that Deadman Wonderland is his home and that he has been there before, possibly when he was a small child. But in the anime, they don't make any reference to this. They don't talk about Ganta at all. I think that's a little bit important. In episode 11, one of the members of Scar Chain named Kurako holds another meeting about an escape plan. Now in the anime, she gives Ganta the wrong meeting time, and so he isn't there for it. In the manga, he is not only present, but talks about how Nagi is wanting to escape because he has a child waiting for him on the outside. Now, in the manga, we know this isn't true because there's a flashback scene where Nagi is presenting his locket to Kurako and saying that there's a photo of his child in there. And the locket is empty. He doesn't have a child. There's no child waiting for him on the outside, which makes us all the more sad. In yet a later scene, they show Ganta training with Kiyomasa Senji, aka Crow. So while he's training with Crow, Mockingbird once again comes in where he shouldn't be. And this scene is very creepy because he starts tasting Crow's blood. And that's obviously very odd. And Crow sort of says something to the effect that Mockingbird was once the strongest dead man in the place. And Mockingbird says, yeah, not anymore. He's the weakest. And you can see the stitches all along his body like he's been sewn back together. And he also makes a very strange movement that reminds Crow of another dead man, and he wonders how he got that move, that attribute. Maybe by tasting their blood. They kind of hint at that, which they should not have, not yet. They're kind of just spoiling this character all over the place. Then in the very last episode, episode 12, the very final scenes of the show have Chief Warden Makina talking with her subordinate about a list of candidates, potential candidates, that Tamaki has. And on this list of candidates, Makina picks somebody out and she decides she's going to go after them. For what? We don't know. And who? We don't know. In the manga, she picks somebody out specifically by their number, mentions which number it is, and very quickly, soon after, we find out it's Azami. Well, she's not in the anime, so good luck with that. And in the very, very final scene, we have Shiro singing the Woodpecker tune again. And Ganta says that sounds familiar. Shiro says that his mom was the one who wrote it. And he also, Ganta also mentions that the Red Man was singing that when his class was killed. He doesn't know how the Red Man could possibly have known that song. Well, I wonder, it's not like they haven't been hinting at it the whole season through. And that entire scene there is not in the manga, not at all. So, do I think that they were going to make a season 2 of this? No, I don't think they intended to. The reason being they had already left out so many important characters and plot points that it kind of makes it seem like it would be impossible for them to move forward. They either would have had to leave out key aspects of the plot, change them drastically, or have them involve other characters that were not present in the manga but were present in the show. Don't think they would have gone through that amount of trouble. I think they would have just scrapped it. So you have to keep in mind that the show was made while the manga was still being written. They didn't know all future plot points, however, they would have known some. They covered 5 volumes of the manga. There were a few more by that point that they would have known about. And they just kind of chose to ignore that. So when a manga is still in progress while an anime is being made, the writers often just write their own ending, either that or they continue on with a different plot. And obviously they chose the former, they just came up with their own ending. Did it end well? Not really. It didn't really answer too much, it kind of just ended. It also didn't have too much character development the way that the manga did. I don't think that it's a bad show. However, I wouldn't recommend it for anybody who's already involved in reading the manga. You already have everything you need there. So if you're new to the series, sure, you can watch it and you'll probably enjoy it, but it just doesn't have anything new for you. It just feels entirely incomplete, unfortunately. If you have any questions about Deadman Wonderland, or if you'd like me to talk more about the manga as opposed to the anime, just let me know down below and I will get back to you on that. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.